Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to show you how to turn a mini PC into a NAS. It's as straightforward as that. And in this video, if you've got an old mini PC that's knocking around in your home or in a drawer or from an old PC setup that you had at work, or you're going on eBay now or your Amazon or your Craigslist or your Facebook and you are seeing mini PCs knocking around at comically low pricing, especially compared with NAS systems with lower CPU powers inside them, it would be very attractive. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. We're going to be utilizing this. This is the Ace Magician mini PC here. It's got 2 NVMe slots on board. It's got a Ryzen 7 CPU inside. And on top of that, it is riddled in USB ports, which is going to be really handy for later. And we're going to be showing you how to install both UnRAID and TrueNAS on this system. Not together, we're going to do side by side parallel. You should pick which one you go for. But before we go any further, before you guys jump into the comments and absolutely tear me to pieces,
Move this man!
let's get a few disclaimers straight off out of the way. Number one, this is not the same as this. Mini PCs have come forward exponentially in the last few years in terms of efficiency, in terms of pricing, in terms of the hardware power they arrive with. They are something else. But at the same time, these are not designed primarily to be NAS systems. And what I'm showing you today is a way to convert this into a NAS, but certainly for industrial users and business users, and certainly for mission critical data, I'm not 100% certain I would recommend this setup for you. This is more for enthusiasts, for hobbyists, or those looking to save yourself a few quid, or just keep things sustainable with old hardware that you've got knocking around. And we're going to be utilizing external casings like this one, which is a JBOD 6-bay from TerraMaster. This is the D6, and this arrives with USB 3.2 Gen 2 connectivity there for all of our storage means. But nevertheless, there are lots of reasons why users probably won't find using a mini PC as a NAS up their strata. I'm going to do a whole dedicated video with pros and cons following this. This video is about how to do it, but to summarise very, very quickly, it's great in terms of cost sometimes because you can get some very good hardware at a very cost-effective price. Secondly, sustainability in terms of utilising your old hardware. You've got knocking around 3. A lot of modern NAS OSs like UnRAID are incredibly power efficient, which allows even modest 100 Nika mini PCs to be usable. Also, on top of that, a lot of more modern mini PCs, again like the Ace Magician one here, arrive with multiple M.2 NVMe slots for either OSs, for scratch disk, for dual OSs with Proxmox, or as editing drives there and caching. And on top of that, a lot of mini PCs are starting to arrive with USB 10 gig connectivity, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, and even if they don't, you can still take advantage of 5 gig to USB adapters and 2.5 gig adapters. Indeed, mini PCs in, say, Intel's NUC series, some of which arrive with Thunderbolt 3, means you can even attach 10 gig Ethernet to these systems. So those are the pluses. The minuses, let's face it, the obvious ones, if you are connecting via USB, bear in mind that whatever USB architecture you're utilizing, that's your maximum bandwidth for your storage. Secondly, USB in some OSs can be a little unstable depending on your setup, and either an accidental disconnection or power oversaturation can lead to a drop of USB storage. These are all reasons why I wouldn't recommend this as a critical setup for a lot of users. Also, drive identity is a question to bear in mind with USB storage devices occasionally sharing, if they're USB DAS boxes, sharing drive identities, especially ones that have got hardware RAID, and that can be problematic in some NAS OSs overall. And of course, bear in mind that although these systems have become very power efficient in the last few years, in some cases you aren't going to be running a PC on one power connection and your storage on the other, so do bear that in mind. So, those are the pros and cons out of the way right now. What are you going to need to convert a mini PC like the Ace Magician one here into a NAS? Well, you're going to need a mini PC. There'll be links in the description to different tiered solutions. I'm going to stay with Ace Magician 1 because I've spent a lot of time looking at their portfolio, because this is a system that is used on my home office for a standard editing setup. That's right, this is actually used to edit some of our videos. But on top of that, they've got a good range of products there, and I messaged them to lend a mini PC for this video. That's where this one comes from as well originally. So Right now, for this, we're going to be utilising a Ryzen 7 powered NAS system here, but all the steps I'm going to show you today can be applied right the way down to some Billy basic Celeron systems there. Alongside that, you're going to need at least one USB drive. If you're going to be doing what I'm doing, where I'm going to be showing you how to install UnRAID and how to install TrueNAS, you're going to need two USBs for that to try both of those out. But one USB for UnRAID, because UnRAID runs from a USB, and TrueNAS, you're going to need the USB just to install it. So this is going to act as a bootloader, which means you're going to have to target the drive there. If you don't want to overwrite the SSD that's inside, you're going to need another SSD. In this case, you're going to need an M.2 SSD to fill that second slot. But if you are worried about losing the SSD that's inside your mini PC already, that may be running Windows OS or something like that, then you can create partitions on that using Partition Manager. I'll recommend an application later in the video called Micron. But on top of that, you can go ahead and just install a secondary SATA drive, perhaps, if your system supports SATA SSDs like this one. Always run an OS from an SSD in every respect. On top of that, you're going to need somewhere for your storage. As mentioned, this is the D6 from TerraMaster, a 6-bay solution, but there are loads of options out there. Depending on how seriously you're going to take turning an old PC or an old mini PC or a new mini PC, I might add, into a new NAS, you can go for things like the QNAP TR004. This is a 4-bay, but on top of that, it's got hardware RAID, so the RAID will be managed by the system. Alternatively, you can go for things like this one. This is the Celeron D8. This is an 8-bay. Now, this is a USB 3.2 Gen 2 device, so it's got 1,000 megs of throughput to deal with, which this probably will oversaturate by a couple of 100 megabytes per second. So just factor that in with your USB connections. Finally, you're going to need an HDMI monitor if you're going to be utilising either one of the NAS OSs we're going to use today, but you may not need it long term. It's just so you can configure with this device on BIOS. Not BIOS, on BIOS, Jesus. On top of that, you're going to need, of course, a keyboard, USB keyboard, to interact with the device. But that's pretty much everything you're going to need. So for now, what we're going to do is hop over to my laptop and go through all of the tools we're going to need to download to turn this mini PC into a NAS. Right, so in order to get the job done and install the NAS software that we want to use on our mini PC, we're going to need quite a few little different kind of assets. So let's get hold of those first. Now, in the description below, there should be a link either at the top or close to the top to when I did the 100k video where I did a build of installing UnRAID or TrueNAS on your own custom DIY NAS. Find that article link below and either select UnRAID if you want to go through all of the assets and the links to everything you're going to need to set up UnRAID for the first time. Alternatively, use the same guide to install TrueNAS. Either way, whichever one of those you use, all of the assets that we're talking about today and a hand-by-hand walkthrough of installing either TrueNAS or UnRAID onto your mini PC is going to be available there below. And I will go through it in this video, but it's just in case you need the written format of that. Now, obviously, you're going to need a mini PC. This is the one that we're utilising today. Arguably, it's a little overpowered for what we're doing here, but I think in order to show the TrueNAS side of things and for maybe a follow-up video on this, this is probably a decent little one. But I know you're thinking, looking at that price tag, that is way too high. And you're right. If you're going to go for a nice modest one, there are a lot of different options there in the market for you to go for. So, for example, if you go down to 159 quid, you can get yourself running on an N95 processor there. Alternatively, they've got ones running on a very familiar N5105 processor. Again, it goes up a little bit, but in the UK and Europe there are some affordable options as well as those third-party options as well, which bring the price down quite significantly. Or head over to eBay where you can get hold of yourself some very user-friendly second-hand mini PCs. Arguably, again, I'm going to be focusing mainly on this Ace Magician system here, but it's just to let you know that there are mini PCs out there, and indeed if you go for the Ace Magician stuff, whether it's new or pre-owned, there are lots of ways to pick up a very respectable NAS for between 100 to 200 nicker. So, moving forward from that, I would say the first thing we're going to need is the operating system. Now, this part of the video is going to be broken down into two different parts. If you're going to be going for UnRAID, you want to go over to UnRAID's own website, and from there, download for Windows. The link there at the top for the USB creator. But do bear in mind that depending on the USB drive you use, some of the installation here is going to change. And for those users, I would recommend down here the manual installation method. Do yourself a favor and keep this tab open. It may come useful later on. If you're going for a TrueNAS installation, for those users, head over to TrueNAS where you can download a system image. And again, if you don't want to sign up to the community on this page, don't worry, just click no thank you, I've already signed up, and you'll be able to download the latest version of TrueNAS. Now these are pretty big files because they are images of TrueNAS there, whether you go for TrueNAS Core, which is the original ZFS version there, the long running one, or you go for TrueNAS Scale, which is the Linux based version, which has got a lot more app development going on. Now the last thing you're going to need, regardless of whether you go for UnRAID or a TrueNAS installation, and for UnRAID in most cases, you're going to need a tool known as Rufus. Rufus is what converts a NAS installation CD, DVD or Blu-ray, otherwise known as an image, into a USB installer. And this is the tool you're going to need to convert TrueNAS or very specific installations of UnRAID onto something that you can install inside your mini PC like that. So once you've downloaded those OSs, now we have to start converting them into a USB installer. So let's start with TrueNAS. We're going to start with TrueNAS because arguably it is the far more straightforward of the two. Now head over to your download section, and from your download section go in and find Rufus. Double click the Rufus installer there that we've done right there, and it will open up in a new window. If you've gone for the .exe version, you've got the portable one that you can just carry around, or the standard version which installs it. If you're running Windows 10, you will be asked for this warning to do with Smart Screen. And in Windows 11, that does not appear, but you will have to give permission. Just realised I ran out of USB ports. I've had to remove the camera. But what you want to do as soon as Rufus is open here is to get your USB that you're going to be using for TrueNAS and install it inside your machine like so. The USB should appear right here. Do bear in mind that everything you're going to do right now is going to format that USB. Now make sure it's got the sufficient storage. Again, I've gone for a 32 gig module here. I've gone for a SanDisk mini SSD there, mini USB I should say, but there are loads of options in the market. Any USB will do, and in the case of TrueNAS, you're only going to need to use it this once. So next, click select, and then from there head to your download section and find TrueNAS, which is what I've done there, and then click open. As you can see, it's saying it's an OS hybrid file. Let it install there and leave everything by default. The default options will be absolutely fine, and then from there click start, and it will begin turning that TrueNAS install bootloaded CD image into something that can run from the USB drive. As you can see, it's warning us all the data will be deleted, and depending on the speed of the USB drive and the speed of the port you've connected, the amount of time this will take will differ. And that's really it. If you're going for the TrueNAS installation, look at the bottom of the screen where the chapters are, and you can skip ahead if you choose. However, what if you are someone that wanted to go for the UnRAID OS installation? What if you want to run UnRAID on your mini PC as your NAS server software of choice? It runs containers better, and you've still got access to ZFS on those pools. For those users, you're going to have to go about things a little bit different. So if you downloaded the USB creator earlier, and if we head into the USB creator, what you can do is double click that tool. It will open up in a new window, and then from there it will double check what versions of UnRAID are available, and you select which one you want to download, and from there give your server a name, give it an IP. You can leave all this as default for now, but then you will need to select the USB drive that you've connected, and as you can see, the USB drive I've installed here is incompatible, and that's because some USB drives are unlisted or incompatible with the UnRAID Flash USB creator. Now, if you're seeing your USB drive as compatible, just go ahead and click Write and you'll be fine. But if you're using an SSD, and believe me with this, there are a lot available on the market that you can't use. If you see this screen here, here is how to get around it. Come out of the USB creator, and then from there, head into that manual installation method that I mentioned earlier on. From here, you're going to need to download the original zip file of UnRAID. This is UnRAID in its original form. Go ahead and download UnRAID in its zip form like so. Click the word zip. It will open up, invite you to download, and go ahead and it will now gradually download UnRAID as a zip file, which you're going to need to move over manually to that USB. Now, while it does that in the background, what we need to do now is head back into our PC, open up this PC, and from here, we need to rename and rebadge the USB. Now, when you connect the USB drive for the first time, you might be lucky and the drive immediately appears as an available drive for you to play with. If it doesn't, chances are you're going to need to format that drive for the first time. If you're a Windows user, head down to the bottom and in the search area, type the word disk part. And then at the option that appears there, click it and it will open up with that admin rights requested the disk part control area here in the System32 window. Go ahead and type the words list disk. As you can see, there is disk 2. Even if the drive doesn't appear in computer, it will still appear here. Go ahead and select disk 2. Once you've done that and you've selected disk 2 and you know that is the USB that you've connected, go ahead and type the words clean. That will allow you to clean the SSD of all partitions. The next thing you need to do by clicking exit is head back down here and again, and this time put disk management. And once you start writing disk management, select the option create and format hard disk partitions. From here, it will show every available drive on your machine. You want to select the USB, right click the drive, or if the drive isn't accessible, right click and select the option to initialize, and then from there click new simple volume. A new window will appear shortly that allows you to configure this drive for the first time. From here, go back into the This PC or My Computer section, and when the USB drive has arrived, right click and click Format. Make sure you give the drive the name UnRAID, just like I've done here. Give the drive the name UnRAID and then click Start. It will format the drive and you'll have a new area of storage that you can use, but just make sure that drive is called UnRAID in capitals. Once that's done, head back into your download section once again and find that downloaded zip file there of UnRAID. Right click and whether you're using WinRAR or just simple zipping, extract files. From extract files, make sure you find the USB drive you created earlier with the name UnRAID. Select that as your destination and then click OK. Once you've clicked OK and extracted the contents of that zip, this is what you'll see. You'll see a list of drives and folders all available on that USB drive. Now you may see this folder here known as EFI with a minus on it. What you need to do is make sure you delete that minus symbol. It's very important and it will help allow this to run first time on the majority of BIOS. The next thing you need to do if you're running on a Windows system is double click Make Bootable. If you're running a Linux system, double click Linux, and if you're running a Mac system, double click this. All of these will result in the USB being converted into a bootable drive. A lot of that is to do with the drive being listed as, or its format I should say, and the file indexing system that is used by the drive. But make sure that you remove the minus from EFI and you make the drive bootable using the .bat file here depending on your OS. And that's all you need to do. From this point, head to eject the drive and eject the drive like so. And now we just need to make our way over to the mini PC and show the physical installation. So now we've got an UnRAID installation file ready and we have a TrueNAS installation file ready. Now the next steps are going to differ depending on which one of those two you go for. Now, if you're going for a TrueNAS installation, you're going to need to make sure that you have a destination on this system that you're going to be installing TrueNAS. Now, all mini PCs, when you buy them, because they always arrive with Windows and stuff included, arrive with an SSD inside that you can use for your operating system. Now, if you want to, you can just format that drive and install your NAS OS on there. Now, if you do that, you're going to end up losing that OS. Now, what I recommend doing is one of two things. Number one is to boot the device up like normal without the USBs and install an application, a free trial version of an app known as Macrum. Now, Macrum or Macrium allows you to create clones of boot drives or change the size of the partitions. Now, again, we'll do a dedicated video on that soon, but I'll link to the software below. But that will allow you to put both your TrueNAS installation on this and a partition to put your Windows OS to still live inside this, but that's not really recommended. Now, for everyone else that wants to turn a mini PC like this Ace Magician one into a NAS, I would recommend installing a new SSD, and this was one of the two reasons, aside from the hardware, that I went for this system, because this system has two M.2 NVMe bays, and that allows me to go ahead and install a second OS SSD into this, which is what I'm going to use to install a TrueNAS. Now, the drive you use will depend on the mini PC you go for. The majority of mini PCs that have been released in the last couple of years tend to arrive with M.2 NVMe bays. So you can go ahead and get yourself a very affordable M.2 NVMe bay. There's not much point in most modern mini PCs going above Gen 3 drives and going for at least a 120 gig drive, or go for larger if you, depending on the OS choice you're going to go for, the scale of which you're going to need that OS in terms of long-term use, or if you're going to be utilizing multiple OSs and something like Proxmox, which allows you to run multiple OSs side by side. Now, if you're running older mini PCs than this, or you're converting some old computer you've got knocking around, chances are you're going to need to use a SATA based SSD. These have dropped down substantially in price in recent years, and this is an SSD we used in our data recovery video from the local refurb IT store known as CEX, and this cost us £21 for a 120 gig OS SSD. So again, your options are open, but just bear in mind that more modern mini PCs either tend to arrive with multiple M.2 NVMe slots or at least support of M.2 NVMe as a whole. And if you're going to go for a TrueNAS installation, you're going to need an SSD for the operating system to load onto. Now, what about UnRAID users? What do they need to do? Well, if UnRAID is the operating system you're going to choose to use on your mini PC to convert it into a NAS, you're not going to need that SSD that I just mentioned. Sure, you can use that SSD as a scratch disk, you can use it for caching, you can utilize it to improve the performance of your UnRAID RAID connected array, but you don't really need to, because UnRAID runs from the USB. And that allows you to just run the USB where it lives in the memory, loaded and bootloaded from the USB, and then the system resources can be dedicated to the containers, dedicated to the storage. Now, what I'm going to do is attach both of these USBs. You don't have to do that, but that will allow me to show you either one of the installations in BIOS. I'm just going to go ahead and pop that panel back on. If you're going to use a mini PC like this for your NAS, and you were already going to use, as I was, a larger direct attached storage or DAS storage array with or without the RAID, don't connect it yet. Make sure you come back to it later, which we will, but for now, don't worry about the need to connect your storage. What we want to do is set up the primary NAS system first, and then afterwards we'll attach our storage. So I'm going to go ahead now and attach the keyboard to this. I'm going to attach the monitor to this. Don't power it on just yet, because I'm going to have to show you how to get into BIOS. Okay, so our mini PC is all connected. We've got the device connected to the local area network, which is on the same local area network as my test machine here. Some mini PCs either won't have an Ethernet port on the rear or have an Ethernet port and Wi-Fi connected. In most cases, the Wi-Fi drivers are already going to be built into the BIOS, so it will still appear on the local area network later down the line. However, in order for us to set this up as a network attached storage device with either UnRAID or TrueNAS, we need to get into something called BIOS. BIOS is ultimately the screen that shows us all the system information, and from there we have to tell the system to no longer boot from its internal drive. We need it to either boot from the USB for UnRAID or to boot for the USB from TrueNAS. So what we're going to do is we've got the device connected up, we've got it connected to my monitor. For you, it'll be your monitor there, and what I want you to do is get ready on your keyboard and get ready on the delete key. Now, depending on your own mini PC, the following key that I'm using is delete, but for you, it may well be the F2 key, the F12 key, or the delete key as well. So a little bit of trial and error may be useful to you. You can spam all three if you choose. Me personally, you tend to find it's F2 or F12. It just happens to be delete on this system. So as soon as I boot the system, I'm going to go ahead and tap delete, and it will flick us over to the screen here. So I'm going to go ahead and start clicking delete, and on my screen here I'm seeing a black screen while we're going into the boot sequence, and tapping the delete key will take us into BIOS, as you can see here. This is our system. We find out a lot more about it, what we're running on, the available memory, that kind of thing. And what we need to do is head over to boot. Now, as you see here, we've got the Windows Boot Manager, which was that OS that the system arrived with, but we've got two different USBs. Now, for me, partition 1 here, that is our UnRAID installation, and partition 2 here on the other USB is our TrueNAS installation. Depending on which one of these you're going to go for, things are going to differ somewhat slightly. But it is recommended, if you're going to be going for UnRAID, to go ahead into boot option 1, click enter, and select the USB that's got your UnRAID installation. In my case, partition 1. And we want the system to always boot from that USB first. Not only will that mean that moving forward the system will always boot into the NAS software, but on top of that, we still manage to keep the original Windows installation without overwriting it. Now for TrueNAS, things will be ever so slightly different. If you want to install TrueNAS on this system, what you need to do is go to Save and Exit and go down to the bottom and select the drive that you know, the USB that has the TrueNAS installation. The reason being, we're only going to use this USB the one time in order to install TrueNAS on a storage media in the system. After that, we'll have to return to BIOS and then make sure that the TrueNAS SSD is the default installer. So for now, let's show you the UnRAID installation. So now we've got the UnRAID partition set to 1, we can either reboot the system or head down to partition 1 here and just go straight into boot override. This will now reboot the system, and as you can see, we're now loaded in to the UnRAID OS boot manager here. Go ahead and click enter. From here, it will now start transferring that UnRAID installation and boot that we created earlier. And what it will do is now load UnRAID from the USB into the system memory. After a short while, the system will fully boot, and here on this black and white screen of text here, it will give us the IP with which to find our TrueNAS system on the network environment. As you can see, it's now completed, and what we need to do, if we want to access the TrueNAS installation from our desktop PC, what we need to do is head back to the web browser on our local computer. So in my case, I will go ahead and move the desktop here to the top, head back into the web browser, as you can see here, and then from here you need to find the NAS on your local area network. Now, we've already got the IP from earlier, but if you didn't get the IP, or sometimes your system disappears from the local area network, I strongly recommend downloading this tool, Advanced IP Scanner. It'll be linked in the description and it's completely free. Use this tool to search your local area network, and it will scan the local area network for all of the devices, which will include the NAS in question with UnRAID installed. You'll find the UnRAID NAS, and then from there take the IP when it appears and then enter that into your web browser. Let's give it a moment to find the NAS on the system. There we go, it's found it there at the bottom. Click down and we can go ahead and double click there and the new tab will open showing us our UnRAID installation. When you first set up UnRAID for the first time, it will ask you to create a password. I've already done that, but after you've created it, go ahead and log in. And there you go, you're now on UnRAID here on your desktop PC. I'm using an older generation version of UnRAID that I need to do some updates for on my USB, but your installation will be brand spanking new. And it will show your available hardware, your system information, and effectively how to begin setting up your UnRAID server on your mini PC. For the TrueNAS installation, we're back in BIOS, and what we need to do is head down to that USB as mentioned earlier that has our TrueNAS installation, partition 2. Go ahead and select enter here. After that, it will go into the TrueNAS bootloader here on screen, and from here go ahead and click enter. From here, it will begin the installer for TrueNAS, and this is why we needed to have either an additional SSD for our TrueNAS installation or overwrite the original SSD that's inside. TrueNAS needs to live somewhere inside the system. So go ahead and select the first option. And then from there, select the target drive. As you can see inside, we've got the USB drive, we have got the new SSD that I've installed, and we've got the original operating system Windows drive that the mini PC from AceMagic arrived with. So you can either choose to tap enter there if you want to overwrite that drive, or go ahead and select enter here to create a new installation of TrueNAS on a new SSD you've installed. Tap enter and tap spacebar and then enter. As you can see, it's warning you that this will overwrite the content of that NVMe. This is to be expected, but make sure you've got your data backed up. Go ahead and create yourself a new password to access your TrueNAS server. Bear in mind that the password to log in on a TrueNAS server by default is generally the username root, R-O-O-T, and the login password ABC123, but you're creating a brand new root password. If you're running a new mini PC like the AceMagician here we're utilizing, go ahead and boot from UEFI. It will be just the same, but for older devices, booting direct from BIOS is recommended. The next option is to do with swap partitions for memory overflow in TrueNAS, and most users don't really bother with it, and I don't recommend it either in this particular installation. Sorry everyone, I bit my lip earlier on and it's absolutely killing me, can you tell? So from now on, it will now begin installing TrueNAS on that targeted SSD drive. The amount of time this will take will depend on the SSD that you're choosing to use, as well as the system USB that you're using and the power of the system itself. Once it's done, it will revert back to the TrueNAS installation window, whereupon we want to return to BIOS so we can get the system to boot now from our newly installed TrueNAS SSD, and then we can move on to the last section of this video, assigning that storage to both TrueNAS or UnRAID, depending on the installation you want to opt for. As you can see, the installation has been successful. Let's go ahead and click OK, and what we want to do now is shut down the system. We could go for a reboot, but we want to make sure that we can get back into BIOS, as that's going to be critical for what we do next. We want to make sure once the system reboots, or at least powers down, that we go ahead and reboot the system, rapidly spamming, in my case, the delete button, to make sure we get back into BIOS, so we can make sure that the new M.2 NVMe with TrueNAS installed can go ahead and run our installation. So now we go ahead, reboot the device, and this time tapping delete, get BIOS to reboot, and we're back in, and this time head back into the boot option there, and where it says boot option 1, tap it, and this time select where TrueNAS is installed. So from this point, click TrueNAS there at the top, and then when you save, and if you exit and save the changes, this time when we reboot, click OK. This time the system will boot directly from our new TrueNAS SSD. We can let it time out or we can click enter, but otherwise TrueNAS is now going to boot for the very first time, which will allow us to go in to TrueNAS on our desktop PC. Now while it does the first time loading of this, as mentioned earlier, but just in case you skipped it, it's worth highlighting that in order to access TrueNAS, you have two different ways to do it. Number one, you can use the HDMI output and a keyboard, video, mouse setup like the one you're looking at. Alternatively, as TrueNAS is booting up, what you can do is head back to your PC that's connected on the same local area network as the NAS and the PC at the same time, and once again return to that app known as Advanced IP Scanner that I talked about earlier on. Advanced IP Scanner will scan the local area network, and luckily, it's just we've absolutely lucked it that the same IP that we were using for UnRAID earlier is still being used now in the same system for TrueNAS. I thought maybe because we put it on dynamic it wouldn't, but luckily it has. From here, go ahead and enter the login credentials you created earlier along with the root account, and that's it. TrueNAS is now installed on that additional drive, and you can access pretty much all of the system resources that your mini PC has on offer to you. Now, before we get to the storage part of the video, I do think it's worth highlighting that in order to continue moving forward, you are going to need to shut down the system and make your way back into BIOS in order to make sure that that TrueNAS SSD is the default loading drive on that mini PC. Otherwise, the next time you reboot your mini PC, it's simply going to revert back to either loading from that USB drive or from the original SSD that the mini PC may have had that has Windows installed. Go ahead and make your way back into the HDMI output. Go ahead and reboot the system, and then from there, make sure tapping, in my case, the delete button to make your way back into BIOS just like you did earlier on. From BIOS, make your way back over to the list of drives, and this time from here just make sure that that SSD is set as the priority option 1 if you want to go ahead with TrueNAS being the default installation. If ever you want to revert back to the Windows installer, just go ahead, tap enter and select the Windows Boot Manager to load from the original SSD inside your mini PC there, and that's it. So now you know how to install UnRAID or TrueNAS onto a mini PC. But next up, what about adding that USB storage? Because your mini PC as an NAS isn't going to be that much use if you're not able to attach a bunch of storage. So let's make our way into one, then the other to show you exactly how to add USB storage. Bear in mind, from this point, it will make a huge difference whether you're using an external USB connected system with its own RAID support, or if you're using a device that has no RAID support at all, otherwise known as a JBOD or JBOD. Let's start up with UnRAID. Now this leads us to one of the biggest differences between using UnRAID with a mini PC or even custom laptop or anything like that, or using TrueNAS. Now if you're using UnRAID, you head into the main area, and from here you can assign disks either as general storage disk, parity disks, or utilizing them for actual storage in pools. Now the main difference between TrueNAS and UnRAID is that if you attach a USB JBOD device to UnRAID in terms of storage, every single drive in that JBOD will be available and visible. Again, there are exceptions to this rule depending on the external enclosure you go for, but as you can see here, this USB 3.2 Gen 2 connected enclosure, which has a drive in most of the bays, shows every single disk across the system, including those internal M.2 NVMe's. That allows us, if we choose for example, to go ahead and assign 3 10TBs for example, slap them inside, then we can add ourselves a parity disk if we choose there at the top, as well as assigning individual disks throughout into our area of storage, thereby creating our new pool all within UnRAID. Now how does that differ to utilizing TrueNAS? Whereas when you connect an external USB case that has either a hardware RAID or software RAID already pre-built, as we've done with the 3 10TB drives, as you can see now it can see 18TB. The reason being we've got 3 10TB drives and a RAID 5 already utilizing the external USB's own storage. That still means that we'd only attach one, but those drives would be in their own RAID, and where that sits in the grand scheme of things, you wouldn't want to create a RAID with a selection of drives that have a RAID inside. That kind of cluster RAID in this USB configuration wouldn't be recommended. So I would just recommend immediately going straight in and creating, just calling it RAID vol or RAID pool. Either way, you would be able to select that, carry that over, and even though it says there's no redundancy, there is redundancy within the USB device. Just make sure if you're using TrueNAS that you go ahead and use an external RAID device, an external USB storage device that has a RAID. And if you're going to go ahead and use UnRAID, then you can use JBODs, but just make sure you use a parity disk for that recovery when needed. And there you go, that is how easy it is to turn a mini PC, new or old, into a NAS. Of course, it's not perfect. If you are a business user, if this is going to be mission critical data, I can't recommend this setup. But if you are going to be utilizing a mini PC to then allow you to repurpose all kinds of hardware that you may have at home, whether you're a DIY enthusiast in the world of NAS or just someone that's owned PCs for a while, this can be appealing. Just remember the big takeaways of this video. One, if you are going to go TrueNAS, you've got to avoid using JBOD. You've got to go for something with either hardware RAID included or at least filter in to something where you can attach drives in a far more integral fashion, because USB storage isn't the same as internal storage, with prone to dropout and of course bandwidth question marks with regards to connecting devices over USB. UnRAID, there isn't the same kind of limitations. Yes, still you shouldn't really be using external storage as integral storage, but I think if you are someone looking to convert mini PCs like this one, UnRAID might be a better option for you, particularly when you look at some of the container stuff and how a lot of the storage can be a little bit more containerized and composited across the array. But of course, with UnRAID now rolling out with support of ZFS pools, maybe that's not going to be enough for you. Thanks again to Ace the Magician for supplying today's unit for this video. You might see this in a couple more videos coming up. And on top of that, do take mind of a lot of the links and the guides that we talked about throughout the course of this video, as well as looking at some of those other applications and services, whether you're going to be using a mini PC as a NAS or just looking for a way to sort of tune up a lot of your network setup there. Now we're going to be working on a follow-up video to this, talking about 4 or 5 straight to the bullet point reasons why this is a good idea and 5 reasons not. I'm sure a lot of you have had an absolute field day in the comments telling me what a horrendous setup this is, and you know what, you're right. But trust me, do a Google. Plenty of people are wondering about how to turn old mini PCs, old Mac minis and more into the next open source NAS setup. And for those guys, I hope this video helped you. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic week. Like, subscribe, usual stuff. Free advice section, free support, Discord, communities forum, Ko-Fi, Patreon, early access to the videos, the monthly seminars and videos that we do, along with exclusive access to content early. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.